Ladies and gentlemen, one of the most sad sights that we see in the world we live today is in a restaurant you'll see a couple sitting together having a meal, and both the man and the woman will be in their own world texting someone else somewhere apart from each other. Another sad sight that we see in our age are many young people. I see them in America, maybe it's because the climate here is warmer, who have a hood over their head, they have earphones in their ears, they're sort of bent down, and they're in a world of their own. There's probably no generation, I think, in human history in which human beings have been as atomized, as separated from each other, and therefore as individualized, as non-social, as in the age we live in today. It's one of the reasons why I think this conference is very important, because there is no substitute for meeting people together face to face, for interacting one-to-one, for understanding each other on the basis of all sorts of subtle things that we as human beings perhaps cannot even put into words. We live, as we all know, in a very much an electronic and internet age. An age that gives tremendous opportunities to communicate with people all over the world. But it also has the disadvantage of making us much more isolated, much more unsocial than we perhaps ever have been in human history. This conference is, to me, very gratifying because it brings people together, and I'm very impressed and very honored to be here with so many dedicated and distinguished men and women, because this conference is not just a lot like conferences I've been with elsewhere. I've been very, very impressed by the spirit of the conference. I call it a very generous spirit, a very humane spirit. This conference idea first began as an homage to Salvador Barrego. It's a very, very good thing, a very humane thing, a very wonderful thing. And I want to express appreciation, I'm not going to name the names, of the organizers who made this possible. It's an impressive venue that we're at. Enormous hospitality has been shown. Enormous hospitality has been shown to me and the other speakers, and I've been very impressed by this. Above all, this conference, I think, should be a model, an example for people in many other countries. And I hope that this is not just the International Identitarian Conference, but the first of others. And I hope that people will come away from this and be inspired to have conferences like this in Rome, in Paris, in London, in New York, and many other places around the world. But thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you very much for the honor to be here today. Another expression to me of the generosity of spirit, the humaneness of this conference, is the recognition that has been shown to people who really deserve recognition. People who have paid a high price, who have suffered for no crime at all, for merely expressing their views in a non-violent, peaceful way. And above all, I think there's no one who has suffered more and has been more an exemplar of that is Ernst Zundel. You know, I've known Ernst Zundel for quite some time. I met him first in 1988. I was involved in his trial there. And many things impressed me about this man. He spoke a little bit here yesterday about his experiences, and that was very good. But he could say much more. In many ways, well, he's not a shy man, but much more could be said about the tremendous travails and suffering he has undergone. One thing that impressed me when I first saw him and met him in Toronto in 1988 was at his desk, he had a little motto. The motto was, "One good deed is worth 1,000 good thoughts." And I've thought about that several times here this weekend, because this conference is one good deed worth many, many thousands of thoughts. It's another reason why I'm impressed and very pleased about what's happening here this weekend. I'm also impressed that the conference has brought together people from so many different countries, religions, religious outlooks, ethnic backgrounds, racial backgrounds, and so forth. In fact, I've been really astonished at the diversity of opinion here at this conference. It's very remarkable in that way. And again, I think that is an expression of the generosity of spirit of those who put this together. But beyond this diversity of heritage, we share a unity of outlook and purpose. We share an awareness that human beings are not merely individuals, that we are also social beings defined by culture, ethnicity, and heritage. And we affirm that a healthy society, not necessarily a prosperous one, a healthy society is more, much more than merely a collection of individuals. The egalitarian individualist ideology that prevails in most countries today, and especially in the Western world, is one that scorns and seeks to eradicate the distinctive cultural, ethnic, and religious identities of all peoples. We reject this ideology. We affirm the right of people everywhere, not only to live in, but to thrive in communities that forthrightly affirm and defend their particular cultural and ethnic character. And it is precisely because we honor the heritage of our own communities that we are all the more sincere and emphatic in our regard for the unique heritage of each nation. We are united in our respect for the distinctive national, cultural, and ethnic identities of all peoples. And in keeping with this outlook, we are also united in our opposition to the groups and forces that seek to rob people of their inalienable right to live in communities of their own particular identity and heritage. And we are therefore also united in resisting those who work to poison and destroy the distinctiveness of all nations. And that brings me to the subject of my talk today. I am focusing here today in my talk on Jewish Zionist power. And I will explain in my talk why this power poses a formidable threat to the honor, the rights, and the interests of all peoples. For many years, Israel has violated, as we know here, well-established standards of international law and has defied numerous United Nations resolutions in its occupation of conquered lands, in extrajudicial killings, and in repeated acts of military aggression. Most of the world regards Israel's policies, and especially its oppression of Palestinians, as illegal and outrageous. This international consensus is reflected, for example, in numerous UN resolutions condemning Israel, which have been approved with overwhelming majorities. And I'll give two examples. In October 2003, the UN General Assembly approved a resolution condemning Israel's so-called security barrier. It's a grotesque thing, parts of which are much larger and more formidable than the Berlin Wall, that Israel has built on occupied Palestinian territory. When this vote came up, 144 countries supported the resolution, representing nearly the entire world's population. 12 countries abstained, and just 4 countries opposed the resolution. They were, you might understandably predict, Israel, the United States, the Marshall Islands, and Micronesia. The latter two member states are small island countries in the Pacific Ocean with a combined population of 180,000 that are utterly dependent on the United States. In December 2003, to take another example, the members of the UN General Assembly considered a resolution reaffirming the principle of Palestinian sovereignty. It received the backing of 142 countries, including all the nations of Europe and South America. In this case as well, just 4 countries voted against the resolution: Israel, the United States, the Marshall Islands, and Micronesia. United Nations Secretary Kofi Annan said a few years ago, "The whole world is demanding that Israel withdraw from occupied Palestinian territories." I don't think the whole world can be wrong. Well, why is it that the United States stands out among the world's nations in such matchless, fervent support of the Zionist state? With very few exceptions, even those American politicians and media figures who might sometimes criticize a particular Israeli policy are nonetheless all but unanimous in their enthusiastic support for Israel, and not just as a country, but as an emphatically Jewish ethnic religious state. In spite of occasional disputes over specific policies, the U.S. continues, as it has for years, to provide Israel with absolutely crucial military, diplomatic, and financial backing, including more than $3 billion each year in aid. Now, why is it that support for Israel by politicians and the media is more vehement and unquestioning in the United States than anywhere else? Well, one possible explanation for this unparalleled level of support is that Americans are vastly more aware, enlightened, or principled than people anywhere else in the world. One person who has spoken candidly about the real reason is Bishop Desmond Tutu of South Africa, who was awarded the 1984 Nobel Peace Prize. When he spoke at an audience in Boston, he said, "But you know as well as I do, somehow, that the Israeli government is placed on a pedestal in the U.S., and to criticize it is to be immediately dubbed anti-Semitic. People are scared in this country to say wrong is wrong because the Jewish lobby is powerful, very powerful." Bishop Tutu spoke the truth. Although Jews make up only about 2 or 3% of the U.S. population, they wield immense power and influence, much more than any other ethnic or religious group. Jewish author and political science professor Benjamin Ginsberg pointed out in a book, and I'm quoting, "Since the 1960s, Jews have come to wield considerable influence in American economic, cultural, intellectual, and political life. Jews played a central role in American finance during the 1980s, and they were among the chief beneficiaries of that decade's corporate mergers and reorganizations. Today, though barely 2% of the nation's population is Jewish, close to half its billionaires are Jews. The chief executive officers of the 3 major television networks and the 4 largest film studios are Jews, as are the owners of the nation's largest newspaper chain and the most important single influential newspaper, the New York Times. The role and influence of Jews in American politics is equally marked. Jews are only 3% of the nation's population and comprise 11% of what this study defines as the nation's elite. However, Jews constitute more than 25% of the elite journalists and publishers, more than 17% of the leaders of important voluntary and public interest organizations, and more than 15% of the top-ranking civil servants." Stephen Steinlight, one-time director of national affairs of the American Jewish Committee, has likewise noted what he calls the disproportionate political power of Jews, which, as he puts it, is pound for pound the greatest of any ethnic cultural group in America. He goes on to explain that, and I'm quoting, "Jewish economic influence and power are disproportionately concentrated in Hollywood, television, and the news industry." 2 well-known Jewish writers, Seymour Lipset and Earl Robb, pointed out in a book they wrote in 1994, Jews and the New American Scene, and I'm quoting, "During the last 3 decades, Jews in the United States have made up 50% of the top 200 intellectuals, 20% of professors at the leading universities, 40% of partners in the leading law firms in New York and Washington, 59% of the directors, writers, and producers of the 50 top-grossing motion pictures from 1965 to 1982, and 58% of the directors, writers, and producers in 2 or more primetime television series." In October 2007, Vanity Fair magazine published a list of what it calls the world's most powerful people, a lineup of the 100 most influential media bosses, bankers, publishers, image makers, and so forth, who determine how we view ourselves and the world and who, directly or indirectly, shape our lives and our futures. Jews made up more than half of the powerful men and women on the Vanity Fair list, reported a leading Israeli newspaper, the Jerusalem Post. The influence of American Jewry in Washington, the Jerusalem Post also noted, and I'm quoting, is far disproportionate to the size of the community, but so is the amount of money they contribute to election campaigns. One member of the influential Conference of Presidents of major American Jewish organizations estimated Jews alone had contributed 50% of the funds for President Bill Clinton's 1996 election campaign. The American magazine Mother Jones compiled a listing of the 400 leading contributors to the 2000 U.S. national elections. 7 of the first 10 were Jews, as were 12 of the top 20 and 125 of the top 250. In recent years, the single biggest donor to American politicians has been Israeli billionaire and media mogul Haim Saban. In January 2007, it was revealed that he had donated approximately $13 million to various U.S. political candidates. The New York Times has noted Saban's ardent devotion to the Jewish state. The paper reported, he has since emerged as perhaps the most politically connected mogul in Hollywood, throwing his weight and money around Washington and, increasingly, the world, trying to influence all things Israeli. I'm a one-issue guy, and my issue is Israel, he said. Michael Medved, a well-known Jewish author and film critic, has written, "It makes no sense at all to try to deny the reality of Jewish power and prominence in popular culture. Any list of the most influential production executives at each of the major movie studios will produce a heavy majority of recognizably Jewish names." One person who has carefully studied this subject is Jonathan J. Goldberg, editor of the influential Jewish community weekly Forward. In his 1996 book, Jewish Power, Goldberg wrote, "In a few key sectors of the media, notably among Hollywood studio executives, Jews are so numerically dominant that calling these businesses Jewish-controlled is little more than a statistical observation." Goldberg went on to point out, Hollywood at the end of the 20th century is still an industry with a pronounced ethnic tinge. Virtually all the senior executives of the major studios are Jews. Writers, producers, and to a lesser degree directors are disproportionately Jewish. One recent study showed the figure as high as 59% among top-grossing films. The combined weight of so many Jews in one of America's most lucrative and important industries gives the Jews of Hollywood a great deal of political power. They are a major source of money for Democratic candidates. Joel Stein, a columnist for the Los Angeles Times, has written, it's almost unbelievable, really, but he wrote this in the Los Angeles Times, "As a proud Jew, I want America to know about our accomplishment. Yes, we control Hollywood. I don't care if Americans think we're running the news media, Hollywood, Wall Street, or the government. I just care that we get to keep running them." Over the years, this clout has had a profound impact on how Americans feel, how they think, and how we act. One prominent American who has publicly acknowledged this reality is Vice President Joe Biden. In a remarkable address in May 2013, he said that what he called the immense and outsized Jewish role in the U.S. mass media and cultural life is the single most important factor in shaping American attitudes over the past century and in driving major cultural political changes. Vice President Biden said, and I'm quoting, "I bet you 85% of those social political changes, whether it's in Hollywood or social media, are a consequence of Jewish leaders in the industry. The influence is immense." Biden went on to say, Jewish heritage has shaped who we are, all of us, me, as much or more than any other factor in the last 223 years, and that's a fact. As Biden mentions, this is by no means a new phenomenon. 43 years ago, during a private White House meeting that was secretly recorded, President Richard Nixon and the Reverend Billy Graham, the nation's best-known Christian evangelist, spoke frankly about the Jewish grip on the media. Graham said, "This stranglehold has got to be broken or the country's going down the drain." To which the president responded, "You believe that?" "Yes, sir," said Graham. "Oh boy," replied Nixon, "so do I. I can't ever say that, publicly that is, but I believe it." That's the difference between what people know in Washington in private and what they all say in public. Now, how could this have happened? How did this come about? Jewish American scholar Alfred M. Lilienthal provided an answer in his detailed 1978 study, The Jewish Connection, a book still worth reading. He wrote, "How has the Zionist will been imposed on the American people? It is the Jewish connection, the tribal solidarity among themselves, and the amazing pull on non-Jews that has molded this unprecedented power. The Jewish connection covers all areas and reaches every level. Most Americans may not even sense this gigantic effort, but there is scarcely a Jew who is not touched by its tentacles. The extent and depth to which organized Jewry reached and reaches in the U.S. is indeed awesome. The most effective component of the Jewish connection is probably that of media control. Jews toughened by centuries of persecution have risen to places of prime importance in the business and financial world. Jewish wealth and acumen wields unprecedented power in the areas of finance and investment banking, playing an important role in influencing U.S. policy toward the Middle East. In the larger metropolitan areas, the Jewish-Zionist connection thoroughly pervades affluent financial, commercial, social, entertainment, and art circles. Because U.S. military might is the most formidable and intrusive in the world, the Jewish Zionist role in setting American policy has consequences for people far beyond the borders of the United States. In the administration of George W. Bush, a group, a cabal of high-level so-called neoconservative Jews played a key role in prodding the United States into war in Iraq. They included Paul Wolfowitz, Deputy Secretary of Defense, Richard Pearl of the Pentagon's Defense Policy Board, David Wormser in the State Department, and Douglas Feith, the Pentagon's Undersecretary for Policy. These men acted in accord with Zionist plans to overthrow the Iraqi regime that were already in place well before Bush became president in 2001. For well-informed people, this reality is no secret. In Britain, a veteran member of the House of Commons candidly declared in May 2003 that pro-Israel Jews had taken control of America's foreign policy and had succeeded in pushing the U.S. and Britain into war in Iraq. Tam Dalyell, a Labour Party deputy known as Father of the House because he was the longest-serving member of the House of Commons, said, "A Jewish cabal have taken over the government in the United States and formed an unholy alliance with fundamentalist Christians. And," he added, "there is far too much Jewish influence in the United States." In Washington, D.C., Senator Ernest Hollings was moved to declare that Iraq was invaded, as he put it, to secure Israel, and that everybody, that's his word, knows it. Referring to the cowardly reluctance of his congressional colleagues to openly acknowledge this reality, Hollings said that nobody is willing to stand up and say what is going on. Members of Congress, with few exceptions, uncritically support Israel and its policies due to what Hollings called the pressures that we get politically. Americans have paid a high price for the U.S. alliance with Israel. This includes tens of billions of dollars in economic military aid to the Jewish state, the hundreds of billions of dollars that the Iraq war and occupation have cost, and the deaths there of more than 4,000 American military personnel. Directly and indirectly, America's so-called special relationship with Israel has also generated unprecedented distrust, fear, and loathing of the United States around the world. By supporting Israel and its policies, the United States betrays not only its national interests, but the principles it claims to embody and defend. In truth, if the United States held Israel to the same standards that it has applied to Iraq, Serbia, and other countries, American bombers and missiles would be blasting Tel Aviv, and American officials would be putting Israeli leaders behind bars for war crimes and crimes against humanity. With Israel and Jewish organizations now prodding the United States into new wars against Israel's adversaries, the cost of the U.S. alliance with the Zionist state is likely to rise much higher in the years to come. In recent months, Israeli and other Jewish Zionist leaders and their supporters in the U.S. have been pressing for a U.S. military strike against Iran, an attack that almost certainly would set off a regional conflict that would be vastly more calamitous than the Iraq War, and which in this case as well would benefit only Zionist interests. Israeli and Jewish Zionist leaders affirm that Jews constitute a people or a nation, that is, a distinct nationality group to which Jews everywhere are supposed to feel and express a primary loyalty. Some American Jewish leaders have been explicit about this. Louis Brandeis, a U.S. Supreme Court justice and a leading American Zionist, said, "Let us all recognize that we Jews are a distinctive nationality of which every Jew, whatever his country, his station, or his shade of belief, is necessarily a member." While Zionist Jews speak routinely of the Jewish people as a distinct ethnic religious group, and often affirm that Jews are members of a separate nationality to which they must be loyal, Zionists simultaneously insist that Jews must be welcomed as full and equal citizens in whatever country they may wish to live, with no social, legal, or institutional obstacles to Jewish power and influence in public life. In short, Jewish Zionist leaders and organizations such as the World Jewish Congress, the American Jewish Committee, and so forth demand full citizen rights for Zionist Jews not only in their country, Israel, but everywhere. Major Jewish Zionist organizations, and more broadly, the organized Jewish community, also promote so-called pluralism, tolerance, and diversity in the United States and other countries. They do this because they believe it is useful for Jews. Abraham Foxman, director of the Anti-Defamation League, one of the world's most influential Jewish Zionist organizations, puts it this way, and I'm quoting, "America's pluralistic society is at the heart of Jewish security. In the long run, what has made American Jewish life a uniquely positive experience in diaspora history, and which has enabled it to be such an important allies for the state of Israel, is the health of a pluralistic, tolerant, and inclusive American society." Consistent with this outlook, the Anti-Defamation League has for years promoted the slogan, "Diversity is our strength." In keeping with this motto, which it claims to have invented, the ADL has devoted great effort and resources to persuading Americans, especially younger Americans, to welcome and embrace ever more social, cultural, and racial diversity. This campaign has been very successful. American politicians and educators and virtually the entire U.S. mass media promote what they call diversity, multiculturalism, and pluralism, and portray those who do not embrace these objectives as hateful and ignorant. At the same time, influential Jewish Zionist organizations such as the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, or AIPAC, insist that the U.S. must recognize and defend Israel as a specifically Jewish ethnic religious state. Pluralism and diversity, it seems, are only for non-Jews. What's good for Jews in their own homeland, Jewish leaders Jewish Zionist leaders seem to say, is not diversity and multiculturalism, but a tribalistic nationalism. There are some people who object to the power of the so-called Jewish lobby because it supports, or rather makes possible, Israel's oppression of Palestinians. Others object because they are unhappy with this or that aspect of the lobby's agenda. But to me, this is beside the point. Apart from the harmful consequences of any particular policy that the Jewish community makes possible, is the injustice and danger inherent in permitting any distinct minority group or interest to wield immense disproportionate power and influence, especially in the country that is the world's foremost military and financial power and most important cultural factor. Imagine the response, for example, if evangelical Christians or Muslims or African Americans were to secure a grip on the American media and on America's political life comparable to that held by Jews. In reality, the Jewish hold on American life is far more dangerous than the one that, in theory, might be held by any of those other groups I've mentioned. And there are two main reasons for this. First, Jews in America have manifestly a strong loyalty to a foreign country, Israel, that since its founding in 1948 has been embroiled in seemingly endless crises and conflicts with its neighbors, and which is now a formidable military power with a large nuclear arsenal, thus making Israel's enemies America's enemies. Second, the Jewish grip is especially dangerous because of the distrustful and sometimes even adversarial way that Jews view the rest of us. Over the centuries, the Jewish community, more than any other single group, has demonstrated a pronounced sense of separateness from the rest of humanity, and accordingly views its interests as quite distinct from those of everyone else. This chosen people mindset, this us versus them attitude, is anchored in centuries of Jewish history and heritage and is deeply rooted in the collective Jewish psyche. The ancient Jewish sense of alienation from and abiding distrust of non-Jews is also manifest in a remarkable essay published in April 2002 in The Forward, the prominent Jewish community weekly. Entitled, "We're Right, the Whole World's Wrong," it is written by Rabbi Dov Fisher, an attorney and a member of the Jewish Community Relations Committee of the Jewish Federation of Los Angeles. And Rabbi Fisher is also National Vice President of the Zionist Organization of America. So this essay, "We're Right, the Whole World's Wrong," was written not by an obscure scribbler, but rather by a prominent Jewish community figure. And it did not appear in some marginal periodical, but rather in what is perhaps the most literate and thoughtful Jewish weekly in America, and certainly one of the most influential. In his essay, Rabbi Fisher tells readers, "If we Jews are anything, we are a people of history. Our history provides the strength to know that we can be right and the whole world wrong." He goes on, "We were right and the whole world was wrong. The Crusades, the blood libels, and the Talmud burnings in England and France, leading those nations to expel Jews for centuries. The Spanish and Portuguese Inquisition, the ghettos and the Mortara case in Italy, Dreyfus in France, Bilas in Russia, and a century's persecution of Soviet Jewry. The Holocaust, Kurt Waldheim in Austria. Each time, Europe stood by silently or actively participated in murdering us, and we alone were right and the whole world was wrong. Today, once again, we alone are right and the whole world is wrong. The Arabs, the Russians, the Africans, the Vatican proffer their aggregated insights into and accumulated knowledge of the ethics of massacre. And the Europeans, although we appreciate the half-century of West European democracy more than we appreciated the prior millennia of European brutality, we recognize who they are, what they have done, and what's what. We remember that the food they, Europeans, eat is grown from soil fertilized by 2,000 years of Jewish blood they have sprinkled onto it. Atavistic Jew hatred lingers in the air into which the ashes rose from the crematoria. Yes, once again, we are right and the whole world is wrong. It doesn't change a thing, but after 25 centuries, it's nice to know. Well, I can't resist mentioning here that some of the rabbi's remarks are stupefying distortions of history. For example, to speak as he does of a century's persecution of Soviet Jewry is a breathtaking falsehood. For one thing, the entire Soviet era lasted 74 years, not 100. And during at least some of that period, above all in the first 10 years of the Soviet era, Jews wielded tremendous, if not dominant power in the Bolshevik regime. Or did Rabbi Fisher forget such figures as Leon Trotsky, commander-in-chief of the young Soviet state's Red Army, Grigory Zinoviev, head of the Communist International, or Yakov Sverdlov, the first Soviet president? But it's not distortions of fact that make the rabbi's essay noteworthy, but rather what it tells us of the mindset of Jews in today's America. I want to emphasize here that to deal candidly with the reality of Jewish Zionist power is not, as we so often hear, hate or bigoted anti-Semitism. We wish no harm to any individual, Jewish or not, because of his or her ancestry, religion, or background. At the same time, we must not permit intimidation, malicious smears, or threats to keep us from affirming what is true and doing what is right. The most direct and obvious victims of Jewish Zionist power are, of course, the Palestinians who live under Israel's harsh rule. But we Americans are also victims. Through the Jewish Zionist grip on the media and the organized Jewish Zionist corruption of our political system, we are pressured, seduced, cajoled, and deceived into propping up the Jewish state, providing it with billions of dollars yearly and state-of-the-art weaponry, and even sacrificing American lives. But it is also the truth that we Americans share some responsibility for all of this. We have allowed immense power, affecting every aspect of our lives and our future, to be wielded by members of an ethnic religious minority group that views the American people with suspicion as potential enemies. Put another way, Americans have permitted people who regard them with wariness and distrust to play a major role in determining how we live our lives and in determining our future, both as individuals and as a nation. To permit such power to pass into the hands of people who clearly do not have our best interests at heart, indeed do not even trust us, is, to put it mildly, irresponsible. As long as the power of what Bishop Desmond Tutu calls the very powerful Jewish lobby remains entrenched, there will be no end to the systematic Jewish distortion of history and current affairs, the Jewish Zionist domination of the U.S. political system and the American media, Zionist oppression of Palestinians, the bloody conflict between Jews and non-Jews in the Middle East, and the Israeli threat to peace. That's why no task is more important or pressing than to identify, counter, and break this power. Today, we are engaged in a great global struggle in which two distinct and irreconcilable sides confront each other. A struggle that pits a self-assured and diabolical power that feels ordained to rule over others on one side and all other nations and societies, indeed humanity itself, on the other. This struggle is not a new one. It is the latest enactment of a great drama that has played itself out again and again over centuries and in many different societies, cultures, and historical eras. In the past, this drama has played itself out on a local, national, regional, or sometimes continental stage. Today, this is a global drama and a global clash. It is a struggle for the welfare and future not merely of the Middle East or of America, but a great historical battle for our global well-being, a struggle that calls all of us who share a sense of responsibility for the future of our own nations and of humankind. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark Weber.